To me, the Baltimore Ravens are a representation of the horrors of being mediocre in the National Football League. They're not good enough to be a championship contender, and we all know they're not. They're also too good to be a crappy team to get a really high draft pick to where they could potentially get a franchise changing player at certain positions. They're also not in a position where they can just sit there and totally rebuild. They're trying to retool and reload on the fly, but they're also not close enough to say we're one or two players away for contending from a championship. They're just kind of stuck in the quagmire of the abyss of suck that is NFL mediocrity. And you look at their 2016 season, it really was epitome of that. They started off 3-0, and people were thinking, hey, the Ravens, hey, the Ravens. Then they proceed to go out and lose their next four. So they're sitting at 3-4. But then in the next 5 games, they go 4-1. So you're looking at a team that's now 7-5, right at the top of the AFC North, a chance to win that division. Things look decent, and then they proceed to lose the last 3 out of 4. And that's the problem with this Ravens team. They were too hot and cold. You had stretches of really good football, and then some stretches of really crappy bad football. Stretch of good football, stretch of crappy football. I think part of that comes in, a large part of that comes in with the fact that this is really an imbalanced team. Defensively, they're very good, at least statistically, although I think at times they could be a little overrated. But, to give the devil their due, this is still a really good defense. They're second in the league against the run, fifth in total yardage allowed, ninth in total points allowed. You could make an argument, and a somewhat effective argument, that Ravens defense either is a Super Bowl caliber defense or somewhat close to it. I think it may be somewhat close to it. It might not quite be a championship caliber defense, but if you had a better offense, perhaps it would be. But again, you look at this offense: 21st in points scored, 18th in total yardage, 26th in rushing yardage. Just not enough production out of the offense. And again, you look at the epitome of the kind of mediocrity, and Joe Flacco in some ways kind of represents that. Not to make this a Joe Flacco bash piece, but let's be honest. Flacco had a good playoff run in 2012 as he was entering a contract year, kind of forced the Ravens' hands to have to pay him big money, and ultimately they did. Flacco has a bigger name than what his game actually deserves. He's won a Super Bowl, yes. He's had some big moments, but in general, you don't think of Joe Flacco as a top 5 or top 10, or in some cases, maybe even top 12 or 15 quarterback in the National Football League. He's a middle of the pack type of guy. And he's not a buster or a bum, but he's not great. And at this stage of his career, he kind of is what he is. You'll have some good games, and you'll have some not so good games out of him. He's mediocre. He's not like a Jay Cutler, Sam Bradford type of mediocre because they just are bad. But he's not much better. And again, when you look at it, the Ravens will have games where their offense can move the ball and they can score some points, and other games where they just look hapless and hopeless. And that's the problem. Mediocre team that is a reflection in part of their mediocre quarterback, and it's just that simple. But you also get to the point, too, with the Baltimore Ravens. It's interesting because this is a team that's won 2 Super Bowls since they moved from Cleveland. Ozzie Newsome is viewed as a saint in terms of the NFL front office community. Like fans, especially Ravens fans, just worship the ground that he walks on. And I understand it and I get it. But, at some point in time, you got to sit there and question Ozzie Newsome a little bit, because this is 2 straight years of no playoffs for the Ravens. Furthermore, this is a guy that has let an awful lot of people go in free agency over the years and hasn't really effectively replaced them. All the while, this team continues to run into salary cap trouble a lot of the years. Like this year, they only have $15 million in cap space when it seems like the NFL average for cap space heading into the offseason is $50 to $60 million. I mean, that's crazy. And there's talk about them letting Ricky Wagner, the right tackle, leave in free agency when they let Kalichi Osemele leave in free agency. Sure, you drafted Ronnie Stanley, that's fine and good, but you're going to let him go in 3 or 4 years when it comes time to pay him? Like, you've paid Marshall Yanda all these years, but this is a guy on the wrong side of 30. How much longer is he going to be able to play? On offense, you let Torrey Smith go, and granted, it doesn't help the argument when he stinks in San Francisco, but he was okay for Baltimore as a dude. You just don't want to pay him as the dude. But you bring in Steve Smith Sr., so your best wide receiver arguably is a 36-year-old dude. I mean, so over the years, I wonder with the Ravens, you've let so many of your guys fucking go. Where the hell does your money go? You traded away Haloti Ngata, Ray Lewis, Ed Reed retired. You look at their roster. How the hell do you only have $15 million in salary cap space, and you just can't blame Joe Flacco's contract? Seriously, where the fuck does this money go? And then you look at some of the drafts in recent years. They've been less than stellar. You've had some pretty notable misses in there. And on top of that, with Ozzie Newsome, you start to wonder for John Harbaugh, yeah, you won a Super Bowl, buddy, but that was 4 fucking years ago. 2 straight years you haven't been to the playoffs. At what point in time does the heat start to get turned up on the seat for John Harbaugh? Like, I think John Harbaugh is a decent coach, but I'm saying at some point in time, you can't always live on the past performances. There has to be some present production, and there just isn't enough present production. And can you really go to your fan base if you go another year of being a mediocre team, another year of missing the playoffs, and sit there and really say things are all gravy, with Ozzie Newsome and John Harbaugh leading the ship? I don't know. And again, coming into this offseason, you got 2 pretty notable free agents in Brandon Williams and Ricky Wagner. Because this team is in a less than stellar salary cap space, because again, I frankly wonder what the fuck Ozzie Newsome is doing with their money. They might only be able to keep one of them. They might let both of them go. And of course, because of some of the less than stellar drafting in recent years, I don't really know that they have capable replacements waiting in the wings. It's one thing to use the philosophy of, you only want to pay certain guys, you have to let other guys go because of the salary cap reality of the NFL if you're drafting well. But if you're not drafting well, you're letting these guys leave for nothing other than maybe compensatory mid-round draft picks, and then you're left with gaping talent voids at the position that you'll fill with other guys that once they get to contract year status, you'll just end up letting them walk away for nothing too. It's crazy. So big offseason for the Ravens, because you have to determine at some point in time, are you going to try and be a contending team again, or are you at the end of the road with the way things currently are, and is it time to seriously consider rebuilding? And they're at that tipping point. They either got to hurry up and contend, or they got to tear this motherfucker down and rebuild it. What can help them tip it towards being a contender is doing better in the draft and having a good draft this year. Now, primarily their needs are on the offensive side of the ball. To me, even with the good defense that they have, they still have some defensive needs. They could still use some youth and speed outside in the 3-4, especially with guys like Dumerville and Suggs. They're on the wrong side of 30 for sure. They've addressed that position some in the draft, but until they find those dudes, they could still look for those dudes. I still think they could use some help at corner. I think they could use an inside linebacker to go along C.J. Mosley. But primarily this offseason, this draft in particular, has to be devoted to the offensive side of the ball. I think the number one need is a wide receiver. They need a playmaker outside. If you're going to continue to wait for Breshad Perryman to be that guy, keep waiting. Good luck to you. But they need a wide receiver. Frankly, they need 2 of them. Because as much as I can talk about Joe Flacco being a mediocre quarterback, if he has nothing better than mediocre weapons around him, it's a whole lot harder for him to be anything other than said mediocre. I look at the offensive line. I still think they could use some youth on the interior because they didn't replace Osemele. And Marshall Yanda, again, is on the wrong side of 30. How long until he becomes a cap casualty and or retires? They need some help there. They need some youth and depth there. They need some youth and depth at right tackle because more likely than not, they'll probably let Ricky Wagner leave via free agency. And then what do you have there? So I wouldn't be surprised that they address that position maybe on day 2 of the draft. Who knows if Cam Robinson's there at 16? Maybe they'll bookend him with Ronnie Stanley, and that would be a definite upgrade long term for this organization to have a pair of bookend tackles like Stanley and Robinson. Running back, I think, is a need. I know some Ravens fans seem to be very happy with the combination of Terrence West and Kenneth Dixon. And look, I like Kenneth Dixon quite a bit, but at the end of the day, this offense was 26th in the league in rushing yards, and the offense just wasn't good enough. At the end of the day, all of them cast for the most part on that offense are potentially replaceable. And if you can find a better running back in this draft and a running back class that is really good, then it would behoove you to do so. It absolutely would. So we'll see what happens with the Ravens. I just really wonder when fans are going to start to call for the seat to get a little warm on John Harbaugh. And when Ozzie Newsome, for all the great, wonderful things he's done as a general manager in Baltimore over the past however many 16, 17, whatever the hell odd years it's been, when he's going to start getting more criticism because, frankly, based off of the recent track record, name or not, he kind of deserves it.